We have Vivace Maxvictor here. And when I'm talking to Vivace, I see this beam of success and beam of confidence that's constantly being pushed out to the world. And what she's done is she's taken some of her passion and some of her emotion, some of her energy, and used that to turn it into a business. A lot of people will work for other people and just live in what they're told to do and just follow the rule and take some W-2 income and work for somebody, which is fine. But what I love about Vivace and what I met about Vivace was this energy of taking somebody's just inner confidence and just bringing it out and turning that into profit. It's awesome to see you all over the media. You've been a huge supporter of Israel. You've been a huge supporter of humanity right now that we're seeing. Can you give us a couple minute background about you and a little bit about what your lifestyle is and how you're being such a big advocate going on right now?
Sure. So I was born and raised in Iran. I lived in Iran during the war. We left Iran because of the war through the Department of Health. My mother was very ill at the time. They had given her 2 months to live. So back then in Iran, you couldn't just go to the airport and leave. So you had to leave through some sort of channel.
What year was that?
We left in 1981. We left. We went to London. And so it was extremely challenging also in my household, which is why I'm taking such a strong stand for the hostages. We came from a tremendous amount of domestic violence. My father was constantly beating my mother up and threatening to murder her in front of us. He would strangle her. There would be his fingerprints on her neck. There would be broken body parts. There would be her blood everywhere. I'd have to clean it up. So I grew up, and of course he would beat me, and there was other things that were extremely wrong with the household. And so I grew up feeling completely terrorized for the first many years of my life. And so we left Iran. We went through the Department of Health. We moved to London. We lived in London. And when we got then after we left London, we got to LA. My father beat my mother up again. And he said, if you don't like it, you can leave. And he said, whoever leaves with her gets nothing. And he had wealth. And whoever stays with me gets everything. So I put my hand up. And I quickly packed a bag, and I was shaking because he had just beaten her again. And my mom and I were homeless in the street. He took our IDs. We had no money. He gave me $100. He told me it was my savings. So we had my $100 bill and no money and no ID, and we were in a foreign country. And so we were staying at it's called the Century Wilshire Hotel, and we didn't know where we were. I'd never been to LA in my life. We got there that night. So we walked out of the hotel, and we just made a left, and we walked into another hotel. There was another hotel next to it. And we went to the back of the hotel. We didn't know how to make a phone call because we didn't know what the currency was that you needed to use. So we stood by the phone, but back then there was phone booths. We stood by the phone booth, and we were just crying and crying. And this man gave us a dime. Back then it was a dime to make a phone call. We didn't have the dime. So my mom called her relatives. And during my entire upbringing, we were never allowed to see her relatives. So I didn't know these people. It was very isolating. So part of my fervor for standing up for the hostages is I'm not comparing our situation to that, but I understand how it feels to be terrorized and terrified every single day and not know what's going to happen to you and have no power or agency over your reality or your body or your well-being. So we stayed with family members for 2 weeks. Then we had nowhere to go. We went and stayed with other family members for 2 weeks, and we had nowhere to go. And then we moved to New York to live with my mom's brother, my uncle, because he allowed us to live with him. And it was very challenging.
Was it challenging to live with the uncle, or did it?
All of it. I was in a new country. I just come to a new country. My parents also made us all skip a grade. So I was in a new country. I was a year ahead. At the time, I was now 12 years old. I didn't know how to fit into the American culture. It's not what I was accustomed to. I went to a public school in the States. Back then, I think we even had metal detectors back then. Like the school that I went to wasn't that safe. I wasn't accustomed to any of this. I just didn't understand any of it.
Was there a time that the Iranians, during the revolution, was there a time that the Iranians that migrated here were they getting bullied by the Americans because of talking about what's going on in the revolution, or the Americans were more welcoming and understanding what's going on?
I didn't have any of that experience. Like nobody bothered me in that domain at all. So I was fine in that way, but it was just very challenging. I had come from so much domestic violence. There was never any sort of therapy. There was never any conversation around it. It's as if it never happened. And then it was like, okay, you're in a new country, go take a bus and go to school, to the school you've never been to, with these people you've never met before. I just didn't understand. And then we had no money. So then there was a challenge of like, I was embarrassed to eat food at my uncle's house. I was embarrassed to go to the fridge. I didn't feel like I had a sense of belonging. And so I would try to like stay in the corner. It was a 1-bedroom apartment. There wasn't like a corner to stay in. There was like a little like room-ish. It wasn't exactly a room. It was like a storage room, but like I didn't have a bed. My mom and I didn't have a bed for years. We didn't have a bed. We slept on the floor. My cousin eventually made us a wooden bed. Like he actually hammered a piece of wood together without a mattress, and we slept on that. It was just, and I was grateful to be in a safe place, that nobody was terrorizing us every day. But then there was all these other challenges. There was like roaches and there were mice, and it's just, I was grateful, but I was not obviously in an environment that a child would, or you would want your child to be in. Either.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you want the best for your kids, but also you have to get out of a crazy situation. How did you take those moments in that time, and what led you to where you are today? How did you transition this very challenging time to how you're able to coach people? Because I find, and I was talking, somebody asked me yesterday what we do that's different. And I say all the time, I go, we know what it's like to be on the bottom.
Yes.
So there's very few advisors and financial people and coaches and,
right.
and that can really understand what it means to actually have nothing.
Right.
And building.
I can really understand what it's like.
Yeah, you can really understand. So how are you using those situations to coach and to really help people and empower your clients?
So it's actually really interesting. I ignored all the trauma, right? Because nobody in our family addressed any of it. And so I just felt like that my job was to go to school. So I went and I did my undergrad in biology and I hated it. And then I got a master's in biology and I hated it. And then, but I only believed that my biggest goal in life was for no man to control me. So I figured, why don't I go? I went to Cornell Medical School after that. I graduated as a surgical PA. I worked in medicine. I hated it, but at least I was now convinced that no man could control and dominate me. Anyway, I worked in medicine for a while, many years, and I hated it. And I was completely I felt powerless. Many people are paralyzed by fear. I understand how that feels. I was paralyzed by fear. I felt that if I left my medical career, I'd be homeless again. I'd have no money. I'd have no autonomy. And at least that was serving the financial piece of the puzzle. But it was terrible because I had no interest in it. And so every day I was doing something I had zero interest in. So, but the only part that I did like was that I worked as a surgical PA in cosmetic surgery, and that was about transformation. So the transformation aspect of it was very compelling to me. And so unfortunately, a series of events happened. I was drugged and raped. And when I woke up, am I allowed to be specific?
You can be as whatever you want.
There were all these condoms everywhere, like many, many, many of them. And I remember I woke up with this guy and I just said, how many people were here? And so he said, this is a huge part of the story. He said it was just me. I could never process that. I was never the same after that. I was so scared after that. I used to travel to Europe by myself. I'd go here by myself, there by myself, and nothing stopped me. After this, I was never the same again. And since I never got any help for the trauma that I had been through, and I didn't get help for this, I actually became suicidal. And so that is why I'm coaching now. So I picked my own expiration date a few days before because I couldn't take it. The pain was so overwhelming. I couldn't process any of these things. I was still doing an incredible job at work. Nobody knew I had any sort of problems. I was dead on the inside. I was tortured and traumatized on the inside. It was extremely challenging. And so I was a few days away from my self-imposed expiration date, as I call it. And a friend of mine told me about this brain scan. And I went and I got this brain scan. I went to another state. It was a whole story. I got the brain scan, and the brain scan, the psychiatrist who interpreted it for me showed me that all the trauma regions in my brain were always like at a level 10. And so then I went on medication. None of this was something that I would ever entertain. But when you're that desperate,
it's so different than what the typical. My wife is Persian, and my grandmother's Persian, and we know about this. It's so typical that Middle Eastern culture that you just brush everything under the rug.
Pretend it's not happening.
Pretend it's not happening. Wait it out. Don't address it.
Nobody wants to hear about anything.
And
yeah, no, I mean, still to this day, no one has addressed the whole suicide thing. That was years ago. Nobody will talk about it.
Yeah. And there was a lot of suicide in my community in Teaneck, New Jersey. There were people who committed suicide. There were people when I was in the Army that committed suicide, and people didn't even talk about it. There was that, and not to only talk about suicide, which is not a fun conversation, but an important one.
Especially now.
There's huge suicide in a lot right now in the south of Israel for teens that are really going through trauma. And also, obviously, there's the youth that are going through suicide. It's become a big problem, and that people aren't addressing. And there's this big stigma that we're not really addressing the real issue.
Yes. It's a huge problem, right? And so then this is the whole, my long way of answering your question is at that moment in time, I started to go to a therapist, right? And I went to one crazy lunatic after another. And I remember I would go to these therapists and I'd say, okay, I know I'm really fucked in the head, but they're more fucked up than me. Like, at least I know what's wrong with me. I know that I need help, but these people, they are not. I didn't feel connected to the therapist. I didn't feel understood. I didn't feel heard. I didn't feel I was getting any sort of guidance or direction. I felt like they were just nodding and the session would end. And I would be like, wait, why did I come here? And so this was while I was still working in medicine. And so for me at the time, I was taking all the money that I was earning on student loans, rent, and therapy. And it was maddening to me that I was spending so much money and I wasn't getting the help that I needed. Eventually, which took a long time, when I got to the other side and I got up and I left my medical career and I started coaching. And so within a year, I had very incredible clients. And a lot of people who worked with me said, hey, we worked with our therapist for years. We never got these results, and we work with you and we're getting the results. And I think part of it is because I have a deep, deep understanding for pain and trauma and for agony. And how do you transform trauma into power and profit, which I have done for myself, and I've helped countless other people do it. I think there's this concept that people are not aware about. It's called the unhealed healer. If you haven't healed your own issues, it's very challenging to try to go and heal other people, which is why I feel the therapists were not effective with me. And I'm not saying that I'm not a work in progress, because I certainly am, but the tools that I have in my tool belt, or many, many tools that I had no tools at all. And so I'm committed to this. And this is, again, why I feel so passionately about these hostages. You can't keep someone in an environment where they're tortured and they're brutalized and they have a constant state of panic and expect them to be well afterwards. And I'm very worried for them and their families. And I feel that it's unconscionable. And anyone who's not standing in the streets yelling free the hostages, they have something wrong with them.
You're reliving. For me, I served on the Gaza border.
Right.
That was my station.
Thank you for your service.
Of course. So I remember these people when they were on I remember I've been to Beirut 100 times. I've been to all these places a lot of times. So for me, it's the trauma that I went. These were good people, and it was diminished. So it was like a light that was just taken away. And these were lights in my life, like quality people, and you never forget those types of people. And it keeps you pushing through when things are challenging. So I had that I wouldn't say reliving of trauma. But
it is. It's a reactivation.
Correct.
Of trauma,
it's a reactivation of, and it triggers people, 100%. And it makes you.
I think when it first happened, we saw with Yair as the response at the time, and it was like he was there again. And I think throughout the Jewish people also, we all felt like that could have been me. I could have been down there. It could have been my child that was captured. And especially for Yair, who was down there, I think he felt like, and he said it more than once. If I was there still, it would have been me. I could have been killed. I could have been captured.
Yeah. I mean, the base that they overrun was my base. So you get that point. But what I find interesting, the reason why I'm saying this is what I find interesting with your story is that you connected it differently than I did. And everybody has been traumatized from what's going 100%. On in a very different way. You took your abuse, trauma, rape, all these terrible things that happened to you, and you were able to relate it to what's going on. So for you, you're going, bring the hostages home. For me, I'm going, finish this war so these people can't live under terror. Everybody, it's such a large event that we're all working in the same mission, and everyone's trying to exterminate what's going on. But we all have different passions, and there's so much there that we can there's so much there to fight for
100%.
Instead of just one thing. And that's why I think it's become so global, is that when you look at, let's say, when some of the politicians go, like bring the hostages home, it's their trauma because they're reliving that and they understand what that really means. And I'm sure, and I'm just thinking about it now, it's Eric Adams. They came, some of the pro-Hamas protesters went up to him and they're yelling at him, aren't you know that you're killing genocide? And what does he say? Bring the hostages.
Yeah,
and why? Because he probably had in the point of his life a trauma where he was felt like a captive, and he's going, there was no excuse for that, and there's nothing to talk about until that ends.
I think every person in life has been captive to something.
Absolutely.
You can be captive to your own madness, to your own shortcomings, to your own way of being. All my clients feel stuck in something, right? So I help people who are mentally and emotionally blocked to become unblocked. So they're captive to whatever is blocking them. Some people have food addictions. Some people have sexual addictions. Some people have drug or alcohol addictions. Other people are captive to feeling inadequate or feeling insecure or feeling not good enough, or their mother told them this, or their mother didn't tell them that, or their father did this, or their cousin did that, or their first teacher did this, or their first girlfriend didn't do that. Everyone is held captive by something. And I think this is a global thing where it's just so unconscionable. How do you grab these people who are living their own lives, who haven't done anything to you, and then put them in an environment where you're constantly torturing them? And so that type of captivity, if we're responding with so much pain to our own captivity, our own bondage that we've created, what would that do to someone's psyche and their family? I don't like every day when I see Hirsch Goldberg, Poland's mother, with that new number on her chest, it destroys me. I don't know how that woman is doing it. And all the parents and all the relatives and the children of the hostages and the siblings of the hostages. And, when you go to these rallies and you go to these events, they're there. They meet you. The family members look you in the eye. It is very challenging to say anything that's valuable to them other than I'm taking a stand for your family members.
Yeah. And we're here with you. We had Lishai Lavi on the podcast. Her husband is in Gaza right now, captured, and I actually went to her house, and she's in one of these kibbutzim in the south somewhere. I don't remember, just wherever she is. And I asked her, and one of the things that I took away the most from it, she said, I can't do. I live in this moment of fight or flight.
Yes.
I don't have anything in the middle. So every single day I tell myself, why am I getting up? Just quit. And then she keeps getting up and she keeps fighting. It's this level of, if you just put your one step forward, you will do. But if you don't,
so
you can,
though,
of course.
Because I know that for me,
that's why most of the hostages and most of the people that were killed aren't speaking up. We're only seeing a few people.
Well, I think some of the hostages won't speak up anyway till the other ones are released, right? Because God forbid they say something and then they say, because you said this.
That's what Jonathan Pollard say.
Right, that there are consequences for the ones that are still captive. I also think it's very challenging. How do they process this level of trauma? Who is going to help them? Who has experience with that level of trauma to help these people? So I feel my heart goes out to all of them. And as far as you saying, how do you just wake, the goal is to wake up the next day. Sometimes it's challenging to wake up the next day. I know for me, and people, I think, don't understand this because you're not in the head of, and I'm not saying everyone is, but in a head of a suicidal person. I had so much pain. I didn't know how to annihilate the pain without killing myself. So the idea is not, oh my God, they're suicidal. Why didn't they just get some help? Or why didn't they wait for it to pass? The level of torture in someone's psyche can be unbearable. So the way that I explain my experiences for me was like a jackhammer that I woke up with in the morning. And every second it got louder and louder and louder. It was intolerable pain. And so I think it's important for all of us to get together in this time to be united and to support each other. But I think it's going to be like the next generation. This generation has so much trauma. And so what do we do? I never thought the Holocausty thing could happen again. I thought it was back then with those lunatics. Did I think that people at a dance festival were going to be slaughtered en masse? And people who are from, multinational, multi-religions, they were just indiscriminately murdered. It is shocking that this could happen again. And it is shocking that so many people are willfully standing by and just actually praising the terrorists. And especially, I think the people in the West who've never lived, like you've been to Israel or you've lived in Israel, I grew up in Iran. We've lived in the Middle East. We grew up in the Middle East. We have experience with the Middle East. These random people who are pro-Hamas sympathizers have no clue what they're standing for, have no clue what they're chanting in the streets.
Well, that's the whole thing. That's where propaganda, and that's why people talk about social media and how powerful it is that it doesn't really matter. If you go into like Nazi Germany, I'm sure many of the Nazis never even met a Jew. I mean, you talk about in the Midwest, I was asking just people that work for us, and I said, how many Jews do you think there are in the world? And these are like just Americans on social media. Like one of them works in social media. That's his business. And he goes, I don't know, 500 million. I go, that's crazy. That's a crazy number to think it's that much, or even 100, even to think it's
because we're so powerful. And we own the media.
Exactly. We own weather. We control the weather.
Yes.
And somebody told me the other day that it's like, the Jews own the weather, right? And I'm like, no, because I mean, we do.
Well,
move
you saw
to
that
Florida.
video today. There was something I saw on LinkedIn where he's running. It says, yes, we run in the whole world from this Tesla car.
Yes.
Yeah, I forgot his name. Yeah.
It was everywhere. But I would also want to say, first of all, there was a lot of trauma, not just with the hostages, of course, that was horrible and it's very traumatic. But, I have a son that lives in Tel Aviv, and he was telling me that right after it happened, people were afraid to leave their apartments in Israel because they didn't know, or maybe there's terrorists here. We said some women wouldn't leave their apartment for 2-3 weeks afterwards just because they were afraid to leave their apartment. And we even had someone on the podcast a while back with Kosher Dills, and she said she was here in the United States and she wouldn't leave her apartment. There's a lot of trauma, just I think, as you're saying, for the generation, and it's very difficult. But I have a non-Jewish friend, so right after October 7th, I said to him, "Look what happened." He says, "Yes, it's very bad. It's horrible. I'm sure the whole world's going to rise up." I said to him, "Well, let's see what happens in 2 weeks." And he said, "What do you mean? 2 weeks? Everybody's going to." I said, "Let's see what happens." And like we see now, they're backtracking. I was walking home on 2nd Avenue the other day. Some woman had a sign. Some of it was in Hebrew and saying, ceasefire now, and forget about what do you mean ceasefire now? What about the hostages? What are you even talking about? It's like ridiculous.
So what would you say to these people? Because you've made it your career to turn this trauma into power and into success. What is your tips and how are you guiding people to that point?
The first most important thing to understand, so many people have heard the concept of PTSD, right? Everybody knows that. But there's this other concept called post-traumatic growth. So number one is to bring attention to post-traumatic growth. There is this concept of post-traumatic growth. I'm a living proof of post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth means afterwards, you're stronger than you were before the event took place. Now, the benefit of my medical career was that I learned a lot about the brain, right? There's neural plasticity. You can literally rewire your brain. So you can take your thoughts of powerlessness and worry, fear, anxiety, insecurity, inadequacy, whatever the pain, and you can reframe them to look at your situation in a different way and to power up so that you are no longer whoever you were before that event happened to you. While that event happened to you, you're actually far more powerful, far more integrated than you were. And so I help my clients to, number one is confront. First thing we do is confront, because there's so many people who don't want to confront. I'm sure you're dealing with people in the financial space who don't want to confront their finances. So you cannot help someone if they can't confront the issue. And you can't say, I'm going to look at this part of my finances, but not this part, right? You need a global look at 360 degrees. What is their financial reality in order to be able to give them the best advice? True?
Of course.
Same thing with coaching.
It's holistic planning.
Yes. Same thing with coaching. I tell them from the first call, tell me the whole truth. If you don't tell me the whole truth, I can't help you. But if you tell me the whole truth, then we can look at it section by section by section and help you reframe the events and reframe your identity so that you are no longer hostage to whatever happened to you back then. And you're not looking at it from the frame of when you did back then. So many people feel powerless. It's important to recognize, okay, at that moment you were powerless. Where's the area where you have power right now? And how can we double down on your power for you to exercise your power today? And there's this thing, there's a slogan that the 12-step people use, which I love. And it says, you're as sick as your secrets. I love that slogan. So the first step is confront the truth. Once you look at the truth, then you look at the impact on you. Then you can look at reframing the impact so that you can rewire who you are and how you see yourself relative to that event so that that event doesn't control you and dominate you for the rest of your life. It's really important. There was a coaching client of mine who had gone to another coach, but her coach then moved to England. So she was looking for a new coach, but her coach had given her great advice. My client back then was in her 30s, beautiful girl, looked super healthy, looked very fine. And she said, Vivace, I want to tell you I'm HIV positive. And I said, okay. And she said, the other coach had told her, don't make HIV your identity. And so I love that frame of don't make the trauma your identity.
Yeah,
like
so
don't make it your identity.
Yeah, don't take. Yeah,
The-
this
the one
Don't let
event-
it overcome you. Don't let it control you. Don't.
Control you, dominate you, frame how you see yourself. I mean, obviously I speak a lot about the trauma because I do this for a living, but outside of doing this for a living, I wouldn't be speaking about it. Right. So it's meant to share so let me backtrack. I spoke at a lot of companies. And when I was speaking at these companies, I would obviously do my whole thing and it would be empowering. And all these people would line up to speak to me afterwards, which was great. And they would say, you're confident. We're not. We're just not born that way. And so the problem was I never shared my story. So for the first 8 years of being life coach, I had never shared my own story. I would share like bits and pieces here and there and drips and drabs, but I wouldn't share it. So in 2019, I posted a video on YouTube, which was literally one of the hardest things I've done in my life. And I stood in front of the camera and I remember I was wearing heels and my legs were shaking so much that I had to take my heels off so I could stand in front of the camera without shaking. And I spoke my whole life story into that. And I said, here's how I transformed PTSD and being suicidal into power. And the first step is speaking your truth. And you can do it too. And this is case positive that it can. I posted that video because no one could relate to me because I hadn't shared my own story.
Yeah, how can you? The same thing that we do. We open up about our financial troubles that we had growing up, and
But it takes courage to do that.
It takes a lot of courage, and some people in our family get a little upset with me for talking about it.
I'm sure my family is like horrified that this video is out there.
Yeah, but
They are horrified. And in the beginning, I was horrified that the video was out there. I thought I would lose all my corporate clients. I'm like, they're going to brand me as a suicidal girl. No one's going to date me because they're going to watch that video and be like, oh my God, this is a crazy suicidal girl. I was terrified of being branded as her. And now I proudly speak from a position of power and authority that, hey, this is what I experienced. And all of this happened because nobody talked about it. And so in every family, there's secrets. Why? Why do we have these? Why can't we just be authentic about who we are and not have to hide this and hide that and hide the other thing? It creates so much discord and fragmentation to try to manage all these hidden compartments of ourselves. And especially when it's external people telling you that you can't share this stuff.
yeah, of course, they try to control. And that's the
Yes.
real problem. You can't really get over things. You can't really get to the next level if externalities control you. And if
Yes.
you want to be free, you need to shed yourself of those externalities, and you
It's
have to do
hard
what
for
you.
a lot of people, especially in our culture.
It's incredibly hard. It's not even hard. It's sometimes it's almost impossible to
Yeah.
do it because of how challenging it really is for those other people. And they live their trauma through you. They don't want to bring it up.
Well, to be fair, I mean, you want to live in a community. You want to live, you want to have friends. You want to have support. You want to feel like you're supported by the community. And perhaps those people feel like if they come out and tell their secrets, they're going to be shunned. And, people are not going to want to be around them. And now that's going to lead to certainly a very lonely situation. If that's where your community is, it's not an easy thing just to come out and be able to do that.
But I think the more of us who do, the more we empower other people to do the same. And especially when they see, hey, you're okay.
But
You're
who's
okay
going to be
with it.
first?
It's
Who
called
wants to be first in the
I was-
community?
Vivace
I
is
was the
first.
first in the community because I don't think there's any Iranian female Jews who stood there and have posted a video like that. Again, I was terrified
We're
when
going to
I
check
did
it.
it.
We'll check it.
Check it.
We're going to
It's
check YouTube.
to check YouTube. It's called My Story from PTSD to Suicidal to something. It's next. It says Vivace Maxvictor, My Story. I want people to see that because people keep coming up to me. They come up to me. So many people come up to me at these rallies and they say, we can't believe how you're being forward. You're being powerful. You're being visible. Your name, like people hide their names or use fake names for Instagram profiles or use some sort of other way to hide who they are. My mother was terrified that I was on Instagram. She's still afraid. She's like, why? Don't do this stuff.
Well, she thinks maybe you'll be a target. You're making yourself an obvious target. Maybe that's what she's afraid of.
I get that from my Persian grandmother. She said to me the other day.
Does she say that?
All the time.
Yeah, I'm sure.
All the time. But it's really, I mean, it's
But we have to stand and we have to fight. And if we don't stand and we don't fight and we hide all our secrets, whether they're financial secrets or personal well-being secrets, this is how the Jewish community will die.
And just to go back to the hostages, those people that are silent, that's the ones that are hurting us the most. Those are the ones that are afraid to stand up. And whether it's Jewish, not Jewish, that's one of the most, you can't be silent and protest.
You can't be. And look, I've gotten, as we all have, right, so much hate mail through Instagram. I have most of the, things blocked, but I got one yesterday that said, go fuck yourself, you're a Zionist bitch. And so I posted it with a musical song saying, hey, I got another love letter. And I put a little heart in it with an arrow. And I'm getting so many people who are commenting, like, we can't believe you're getting this stuff. I'm like, post anyway. You're going to get this stuff. You have to be stronger. You have to be mentally and emotional. This was a real person.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. Was it a private account?
I don't remember.
Check if it's a private account. You'll see a lot of them are bots.
He had a lot of followers. Like he had a fair amount of followers. So like he had over 700 followers. Okay. So he wasn't like one of these like zero people.
Zero following 200.
Not one of those randos. But regardless of him, if you take a stand for your truth and if you take a stand for your community, you are going to be some sort of target in something. The only way not to be a target is to hide. But then when you hide your power, you hide your truth, you hide your essence. And you talked about the light. You hide your light. I took Kabbalah classes for a little while, and they're big about your light. It is your light. And it is the light of the Jewish people that is so empowering and so intoxicating that so many people want to annihilate us because we're a small bunch, but our light is magnanimous.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is really to address this is you have to get to its core. Once you get to the core, then the light can come out and you're actually able to then take a first step. And it's really the whole thing is admitting you have a problem. It's stages in everything. It's you go to a doctor and you go, there's HIPAAs and there's confidentiality agreements and there's all this stuff. It's all comes down to that same thing, but people don't really work on their future and on their inner self. And I would say, like I'm taking from the conversation is that you're telling people you're blocking your inner self by not working on it.
Oh, 100%.
And you're not addressing it.
Not addressing it, but a lot of people come to me actually because they want to make more money. So that's like majority of my clients come through that avenue. And so they're like, you helped someone else multiply their income, help me do it. And I'm like, okay, well then you have to do the steps they did. And so I feel that it is so important when we transform trauma, it's into power and profit. The money part is so important, especially for women. I think it is important for women to be very fiscally sound so they have opportunity in life. And unfortunately, women don't have the same opportunities that men do. We just don't. So that part of it is really important. So I'm excited that you guys offer the financial end to the community and whoever is willing to be graced by your knowledge and your wisdom and your experience, because the money part is so important. Huge. When we don't have money, we don't have power. I don't care if you're a good person. I was a good person and we were penniless. It didn't help us have any power and authority. And the reason I can be in the streets is because I have my own money. If I worked for someone, first of all, there is no way they would allow me to post majority of the things that I'm posting. There is no way. I would have to go through some sort of thing, and then the company,
you get fired.
I would be fired in 2 seconds if I posted all my pro-hostage content or whatever I'm posting. I would definitely be fired. So I think it's so important to also reinforce financial empowerment for our community, because if you have that, then you can also take a stand and not be afraid that you'll get fired. So to my knowledge, none of my clients have, I had a lot of people unfollow me. I had 2,000 people unfollow me, which is fine. But none of my clients left because of this. They weren't like, oh my God. So there were incredible humans. There's so much support for us. And I think that's really important as well to remember at a time like this, when you stand up for your truth, when you stand up for yourself, when you're willing to be bold, you're going to be the target, but you're also going to be the target of so much love.
Yeah, it's such a deep point. If you had one value that you would classify yourself as, what would that one word be for you?
100%, it's truth.
Truth.
100%.
It's interesting because Avi Meir, from the former editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post, had the same thing.
Correct.
And that 100%. was really his thing.
Because that cost me my life almost. Untruth.
Understood.
Truth.
That's why. Yeah, because you were trying to hide what really happened and you were trying to pretend it didn't exist.
All of it.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It's a very interesting
Untruth
point.
Almost killed me. Truth liberated me.
Yeah. And when
So
people
it's
don't admit, what happens, and they want to blame and they want to accuse and
when
they
you
want to,
don't admit it to yourself, you have
Correct.
to admit it to yourself.
Yeah.
What are you thinking? What are you feeling? What are your hopes? What are your dreams? What are your prayers? What do you want? What do you want to create in your life?
Yeah.
What do you want your legacy to be? You have to admit it to yourself first. I think the biggest problem is that we lie to ourselves. And a lot of it has to do with cultural programming and cultural conditioning. And that really pisses me off.
where can people find you? How can people get in touch with you? And when's your book coming out?
Oh my God. Everyone asks me about this book. So the book is non-existent, although maybe one day it will be, but it's fierceselfconfidence.com, FIERCE, selfconfidence.com. And my handle is at Vivace Maxvictor.
And I love that you're not at Vivace, you're not fearandconfidence.com on your Instagram. It's exactly who you are. And it's exactly, honestly, how I thought this conversation would go. And you were talking to me before, like, oh, can I give you my bio? I go, I know everything about you because you're honest. I met you for 2 seconds. I was like, this girl's honest, and she's just going to keep taking over the world. So it doesn't really make a difference. So I can read her bio or I can meet her in person. It's all going to be the same conversation. So what's the point? And we might as well just live it for the first time. So
Awesome.
we want to really thank you for coming on.
Thank you both for
We want to really
having
thank
me.
you for being part of this and really continuing to stand up, because people get tired and people were really, really rallying at the beginning, but you keep showing up and I keep seeing you everywhere. And it's really incredible what you do. Yeah, there's no reason to.
I will not stop. And I want to say every Friday at 9 a.m., we stand at the UN Secretary General's private residence. It's at 3 Sutton Place. We need more people to show up. And every Sunday at Central Park at 11 a.m. at 90th Street in Central Park West, there is a rally. We need to be strong so those videos can go back to Israel so that the people know the people of New York are standing with you.
And the people around the world are standing with them.
Amen.
So we really appreciate you coming.
Thank you for
and
having me.
we thanks for everybody for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.